To discuss all the intricacies of the Iraqi election, I'm joined in the studio now by former U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Zalmay Khalilzad. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
The Financial Times is reporting that what the Iraqis want is stability, they want reform, they want a growing economy, and they want an end to corruption and nepotism in Iraq. Are they going to get that after the election?
Well, the aspirations of the Iraqis are obviously understandable, but Iraq is going through a very difficult period all across that area of the Middle East that Iraq is a part of. Unfortunately, sectarianism is growing. The Sunni-Shia dispute within Islam, and local identities become politicized, whether you're a Kurd or you're a Christian. And as a result, also the conflict between Syria and Iraq has become intertwined, and regional players are also filling the vacuum left behind by the United States in Iraq. So it's pulling the country in different directions. And therefore, although Iraq potentially a very rich country in terms of its natural resources, but is not stable right now, particularly in significant parts of Arab part of Iraq, because Iraq is also has a non-Arab part, Kurdish part, and also there are services problems, and given the potential wealth, people are unhappy. Clearly, although there's been progress in parts of Iraq in terms of the level of services, but broadly unhappiness with the quality of services, and security clearly also being a significant, and in recent months a growing problem for the Iraqis.
Has Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki mismanaged the situation in Iraq? He's come under strong criticism from the United Nations as well as from human rights groups like Human Rights Watch. I mean, if we just look at the figures over the last few years, last year almost 8,000 people were killed in sectarian violence in Iraq. Just in the first 3 months of this year, 2,000 people have been killed. Should the blame go to the Prime Minister?
Well, when you're in power, of course, and he's been in power now for 8 years or more, the incumbent is blamed for the problems that the country has, whether he's personally responsible or whether he's the victim of the circumstances that Iraq finds itself in. You get the credit for the good things that happen, whether you're responsible for it or not, and you get blamed for the negative things. And while there have been some progress in parts in Iraq, but there is all these problems that you mentioned and that I discussed earlier, he does get the blame for it. The question is, how would the voters evaluate not only his performance, but the alternatives? One is your record, the other is your competition. And there is a lot of groups that are running for election. It's a very fragmented electoral system with lots of parties running. So we'll see. But I think he will be held accountable, at least in part, for what's going on there.
Right. He has been intolerant of the opposition there. I mean, there's been reports, the most recent report in the New Yorker magazine, where a Sunni opposition politician that criticized Nouri al-Maliki was actually arrested. And there have been pictures of this politician showing that he'd been tortured. And in fact, the politician's brother was killed in this particular incident. So this is a Prime Minister, in your view, is he someone who is not tolerant of the opposition?
Well, if you compare Iraq to many other countries in the region, there is more debate, discussion, criticism of the Prime Minister, of the government, and a very rigorous media and political debate. But there also have been those instances or incidents that, like the one that you mentioned, the representative from Anbar province.
Right, that's right.
And there have been other incidents as well. So it's a mixed record, I would say, in this regard. But Iraq is also a very difficult place. as I said, there is to a significant degree the intertwining of the conflict in Syria with the conflict in Iraq. Forces come across the border from Syria into Iraq, extremists and terrorists, even al-qaeda type forces. Iraqis go across the border. Different Iraqis fight on different sides of the conflict in Syria, and but there is also issues of sectarianism that I mentioned before. I mean, sometimes there's some tribes and some of the opposition forces and some political forces join hands in terms of the opposition with the prime minister. So it's extremely complicated. But I would say that it is a very mixed record. Yes, indeed.
You know, you've been involved in Iraq for a very long time. Of course, you were ambassador there. And when you look at the legacy of the U.S. involvement there, I want to look at something that George Bush, who was your boss, he said 3 weeks before invading Iraq, a liberated Iraq, he said, can show the power of freedom to transform that vital region by serving as a dramatic and inspiring example for other nations in the region.
Right.
That's not what's happened, has it?
Well, the thing is that the region of the Middle East, broadly speaking, has not been working for a long time. It has not been working effectively for the people of the area, and it has produced problems not only again for the people of the area but for the world. And 9/11 in part was the result of the lack of working.
But the question is, has the U.S. involvement aggravated that?
Well, that I was going to come to that in the sense. So one idea, although the primary motivation for the U.S. to go in was that in the aftermath of 9/11, they didn't want problems unattended, that they would grow and become even bigger. The assumption was that Iraq at WMD at that time, it turned out not to be correct, but the assumption broadly shared internationally was that Iraq did. And the hope was that, therefore, that the change in Iraq would have a positive effect across the Middle East to make it into a more functioning region. Now, so far, it is far from what one would have hoped. But these processes of change of societies that are very old and have their own methods of working takes a lot of time, and you know, although 10 years is a long time, but in the sort of, when you look at the history of regions changing, it is not necessarily all that long. It took Europe a long time to come out of its dysfunctionality, as its problems were, you know, caused 2 world wars among other things. This region still, you know, it's trying to find its bearing. The various forces are pushing in different directions. There is no consensus on how to proceed to get a successful, stable, prosperous region established. So I would say it started something, but so far the achievements are clearly very mixed, and the people of Iraq have paid a high price.
Right, and you mentioned earlier the impact that the Syrian civil war is having on Iraq. Is it going to have an impact directly on the outcome of this election in any way?
Well, the impact would be that, unlike the previous election of 2010, where cross-sectarian parties did better, you had the Iraqi, which was a secular cross-sectarian party, getting the largest number of seats from the election, 91 or 92 seats, with the state of law, which Prime Minister Maliki led, getting the second largest at 89 or so seats. This time, I think the cross-sectarian parties will do poorly, and sectarian parties that only vote for their own sect, leaders from their own sect, will do better in the Arab part. And therefore, I think one of the impacts of the Syrian conflict, which has strengthened sectarianism, will be to make the vote in Iraq more sectarian than the previous election. The first election, after the Sunni Arabs participated, people voted their identities. The Iraqis were hoping, and my own hope was that that was a transitional phenomenon, that then issues and cross-sectarian attitudes or policies would become dominant. And there was a move in 2010 in that direction, but I think there's a kind of a devolution back to more sectarian approaches.
So by that, do you mean that these divisions between Sunni and Shia, and we've seen the violence that it's caused, is going to be, those divisions are going to be even deeper after this election rather than there being some kind of rapprochement between the two groups?
Right. I think it will manifest, the elections will manifest that deepening division that one sees. And one of the contributing factors to that deepening sectarian division is what's happening in Syria, and the critical fault line now in this region, that Sunni-Shia division, and different regional powers also taking sides on different sides of that fault line. And Iraq is caught right in the middle of that fault line, because this is a major country that bridges the Sunni Arab world largely with the Shia Iran, with the Arab versus Persian, with the Arab Turkey, Iran coming on different sides of Iraq. So it is in part because of not only its domestic composition, but not only because of the geography. It's paying a price for the broader tension that you see in the region.
In many respects, Iraq's become the battlefield there.
Iraq has, and it has become intertwined with Syria. So the two have become, in some parts, one in terms of the conflict.
Okay, Ambassador, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.